Sources of income tax law in India. First, the Income Tax Act 1961. It is the BAR Act. So, this act contains the major provisions relating to income tax in India. So, it is there are so many acts in this country. So, the one which is governing the income tax is the Income Tax Act 1961. This act contains major provisions relating to income tax in India. So, it is containing majority of the provisions relating to income tax in India. The act contains chapters, schedules, provisions, etc. So, the act itself is a very detailed, very lengthy one. So it requires a lot of mastery to understand it. And it is one of the oldest act in this country. So the CBDT, the Central Board of Direct Tax, is responsible for the administration of this act, and it functions as part of the Finance Ministry of the Government of India. So you must have seen it every year. If there are changes in the income tax rates, it is only the Finance Minister who announces it as a part of his budget. So it is the income tax is under the direct control of the Finance Ministry. So under Finance Ministry, CBDT works. So there are two major boards under Finance Ministry. One is the Central Board of Direct Taxes. Another one is called Central Board of Excise and Customs. So this Income Tax Act is governed by CBDT. It is a supreme board which controls the Income Tax Act. So Income Tax Act is being governed by the board which is called the CBDT, Central Board of Direct Tax. So Central Board of Direct Tax is functioning under the Finance Ministry, and the Finance Minister is the supreme person who governs the who is a supreme person who can take decisions with regard to finance of this country. So CBDT is the one which is looking after the Income Tax Act. So it is a board which decides upon the various rules and various changes which has to be made to the income tax provisions of this country. So CBDT is responsible for the administration of this act. So it is a CBDT. The CBDT is the board which is administering the Income Tax Act, and it functions as part of the Finance Ministry of the Government of India. So Finance Ministry is only controlling the CBDT. It comes directly under the control of Finance Ministry. It enjoys certain powers of delegated legislation and has the power to make rules for carrying out the implementation of direct tax laws. So CBDT has a lot of powers. It is a board, and CBDT has a chairman. So they all discuss the income tax provisions of this country, and if at all there are changes to be made, they would enable it. If there are new laws to be made and new rules to be made, everything would be requiring the consent of CBDT. So CBDT is a supremo with regard to Income Tax Act of India. So they are enjoying certain powers with regard to legislation and has a power to make rules for carrying out the implementation of the direct tax laws. Next comes Income Tax Rules 1962. So the first major important act is the Income Tax Act. Next comes rules. Rules are just subservient to act only. So this is the BAR Act is a very important constituent. The next second place comes to Income Tax Rules. So Income Tax Rules 1962. Under Section 295 of the Act, the CBDT is empowered to formulate rules for implementing provisions of the Act. So in order to facilitate the implementation of the Act, rules are necessary. And who is formulating the rules? The CBDT is the one which is formulating the rules. So CBDT only is empowered to formulate the rules for implementing Income Tax Act. So Income Tax rules are separate from the Income Tax Act, and for that reasons, the rules can be amended easily by publishing notification in the official gazette of Government of India. So it is very difficult to amend the act as such. So every time you want to make some amendment in the Income Tax Act, you have to go to the Parliament and require to change it. It is rather cumbersome. That is why there is separate income tax rules. So income tax rules are separate from the Income Tax Act. Is it done purposefully? Yes. In order to make amendments very easily to the rules, the income tax rules are separate from Income Tax Act to facilitate changes very easily. And for that reason, the rules can be amended easily by publishing notification in the official gazette of Government of India. Whenever there are changes made, mostly changes are made to the income tax rules, and income tax rules help in facilitating the implementation of the Act. The implementation is very easy with regard to income tax rules, and it can be amended easily. But for amending the Income Tax Act, amendment bill has to be placed before Parliament and it has to be passed there. So whenever if an act is required to be amended and when it is taken to the Parliament, it requires a lot of, it is involving lot of challenges. There will be discussion, there will be there will be debates against a particular amendment, and people will be against it, for it, then it will be passed or it won't be passed. So it is all a gamble. Therefore, for amending the Income Tax Act, amendment bill has to be placed before Parliament and has to be passed there. So Income Tax Act, whenever it has to be amended, it has to be placed before Parliament and it has to be passed there. However, in the case of any conflict between the Act and the rules, a provision of Act shall be applicable. So the Act is only the supreme authority. Therefore, if there is conflict, most of the times they would be in line. But sometimes, if at all there is a conflict, Act is only supreme and rules are subservient to the Act only. So provisions of the Act are always supreme. In case of conflict, only the Act is applicable and the rules will not be applicable. Rules are always one step below the Act only. Next, Finance Act. So we saw the Income Tax Act, then we saw the income tax rules. Next comes Finance Act. So let us recall that service tax was, there was no Service Tax Act as such. So service tax was provided in the Finance Act only. So Finance Act is also a very important constituent. So the purpose of the Finance Act is mainly to prescribe the rates of tax that would be applicable for a given assessment year. So with regard to income tax, always the concept of assessment year is being repeated. So normally in other technical parlance, assessment year wouldn't be used to a greater extent, but only with regard to Income Tax Act, the word assessment year is being repeatedly used. So even the assessment year has much more prominence over the financial year, or the assessment year has much more prominence than the financial year or the previous year. So assessment year is a very peculiar to the Income Tax Act. So it is having much more importance than the financial year with regard to Income Tax Act. So the purpose of the Finance Act is mainly to prescribe the rates of tax that would be applicable for a given assessment year. So the rates of tax, whatever may be the income tax slab rates, everything would be differing from year to year depending upon the trends of the country. So the rate of tax applicable for the given assessment year is being given out in the Finance Act. So purpose of Finance Act is mainly to prescribe the rate of tax that would be applicable for a given assessment year. However, any desired change in the provisions of the Income Tax Act can also be made by incorporating them in the finance bill presented every year before the Parliament. When the bill is passed, it becomes Act. So before passing, it is a bill. After passing, it becomes an Act. So what happens? The rate of tax is being applicable for a particular assessment year is being given in the Finance Act. Any desired change, the provisions of the income tax is made through by incorporating them in the finance bill. So after passing, finance bill becomes a Finance Act. So it is passed every year before the Parliament. Now it contains 4 parts. So Finance Act contains 4 parts. Part 1, Part 2, Part 3 and Part 4. So what is a Part 1? It deals with the major thing, that is a rate of tax applicable for the current assessment year. So Part 1 of the Finance Act is regarding the rate of tax applicable for the assessment year. Part 2 is with regarding to the TDS, rates of TDS for the current financial year, and Part 3 is for the rates for calculating the income tax for deducting tax from income chargeable under the head salaries and computation of advance tax, and Part 4 is with regard to agricultural income. So totally there are 4 parts. Part 1 is with regard to the rate of tax applicable for the assessment year. Part 2 is with regard to TDS. Part 3 is with regard to the tax with regard to salaries and computation of advance tax. And Part 4 is with regard to computing net agricultural income.